As the taxi was driving through the entire Monstropolis, its headlights illuminated the road ahead. Streetlights lit up both sides of the road, but there was still a noticeable darkness all around. No wonder, since the clock was approaching 8 in the evening. Sully sat in the rear chair of the seat of the cab, looking out the window. All he could see was his own reflection hanging outside the car, and it upset him. He really did look that tired. He closed his eyes and tried to think clear, but his head was still exploding by the thoughts and questions. Less than 30 minutes had passed, and he had gotten the shock of his life, and his hands were still shaking. He even sat on them. When he first spotted Randall asleep on the couch in the apartment, he had frozen, completely unable to think or move. He just had stared at his former rival for several minutes, and all the image had been so hard to take in. Randall had looked so exhausted, so thin, so fragile. This was definitely really the same monster who tried to kill him a month ago. Sully didn't really know what made him question the way Randall looked right now. Or was it the fact that he had Sophie's story at the back of his head while watching him? Whatever it says, there was something that caused him to look at Randall in a whole different way. A part of him wanted him to reach out his hand and stroke his head, try to brush away his bad memories, maybe. Randall's life had been unfair, and nobody had even known it made Sully feel guilty. If he had known a month ago or earlier, he would have tried to help him, no doubt about it. But what was he supposed to do now? Wake Randall up? Call Sophie, maybe? Sully had gotten his senses and decided to do the best thing he could probably do was not touch the sleeping monster. Maybe fragile sleeping Randall would be the best. Month ago, angry, vengeful Randall was still in his waking state. Sully had confessed to himself that if that was the case, he preferred to be the sleeping version. He wasn't in the mood for attempted murder right now. After looking at the purple monster on the couch for a while, Sully had finally turned around to leave and found 1,000 of questions he would love to ask Randall, as how he gotten back, how long he had been in Monstropolis, and so on. But he chooses to trust his earlier decision of not waking him up, so he was sure that it was for the best. Although he did know about Randall more now talking to his sister, he still didn't see him as a close friend he could really talk to. He seriously doubted Randall just looked at him the same way either. No, the best thing he would probably do is just leave. So he did. Back in the cab, he started doubting. Randall had looked terrible. Was he okay? Should he have perhaps done something more than just look at him? How should he know he'd come back? Does anyone else know about the lizard's return? Did Randall even have someone to turn to? Sophie, basically, should he perhaps have done something than just basically sitting there? So, with that being said, Sophie would have mentioned it if she knew her brother was back, wouldn't she? All the questions caused Sully to moan, and he started to rub his eyes. Why was he so upset over Randall? The second top scare he had occupied his mind before? This was simply the feeling of guilt taking over. His stomach growled. That was the last time he ate, around lunch. Did Randall have any food? He had looked very thin. He tried his best not to think any more about Randall tonight. It just gave him a headache. Instead, he started thinking about dinner. Sully was for sure a nice meal would make him feel better and would be able to think clear. As the taxi approached his building, he had actually managed, almost, to replace the thoughts of Randall with the thought of Mike's slime burgers. Monsters Inc. CEO was more upset more than usual during dinner. Mike went on about everything as usual, but Sully didn't even respond to his normal yeses and wows at suitable places in the conversation. Mike noticed, "Hey, big guy, I just told you Celia hurt her tentacle when she collected her mail today, and you didn't say a thing? Don't you care about her? Don't you care about me?" Sully just looked at his friend with an empty expression. "And you have hardly touched your food, your slime burger. Come on, I've struggled in the kitchen for like 2 hours, and for what? First, you come home late. Second, you're being dull. And third, so, are you even listening? Okay, that's it. It is official. You don't care about me." Mike threw his arms up in the air and leaned back against a chair and went on. "I have mattered to you, have I? What about college, Sully? Who trained you to be the greatest scarer ever? Have you forgotten? You owe me. Come on, Sul. At least you could do is talk to me. What's eating you?" "Randall." Sully didn't even want to look up. "Okay, wait, what?" Mike just stared at Sully as if he was a stranger who just showed up at the dinner table. "Don't tell me you're sitting here thinking about Randall." Sully, he's gone. We threw him for the door. He's history. Don't let his memory spoil our meal. You don't understand, Mike. Sully's face was expression of a level of grief that Mike had hardly ever seen him with before. I have talked to Sophie today, his sister. He's really had a difficult past. His parents died when he was only 8. He spent a long period of time in the hospital. He had a hard time making friends. He's a criminal. Mike spoke extra clearly to make sure Sully got every word he was saying. He tried to kill us both and put me in that thing. Mike was still having problems talking about the scream extractor. I think he was messed up, Mike. You should have heard Sophie. She truly gave me an inspiration of him. And I don't exactly think he's a bad person. I just think he just made a lot of bad choices. Well, that's really good, Sully. Take it from his sister. She's probably the right person to give you the professional, objective option. Sully raised his hand to interrupt, but Mike just went on. But unfortunately, as I pointed out before, Randall is not around anymore. Mike then went back to his dinner, and Sully tried to do the same. But then there was the other thing that was troubling him. Mike? What? You want to talk about water newts now? No, still Randall. Yikes, Sully, you're obsessed. Mike continued to eat, but Sully could see that he was eager to see what he had to say. Mike, just listen. I was in his apartment with Sophie today, and I told you at work, and I went back later there this evening on my own. You did? Geez, Sully, you're obsessed. What exactly did you do in there? Lick his toothbrush? I left my wallet there and went back to get it, but it's not that. Sully leaned forward and started whispering, although he and Mike were alone. Mike, Randall is back. For the first time in the day or maybe that year, Mike felt completely silent. It took him several seconds before he was able to speak again. What? His eye was even wider than usual, and his mouth was wide open, which was rather unpleasant sight, since it was full of food. Why did you say that? I saw him. When I got back there, he was asleep. He didn't see me. I don't think he knows that, but I don't know what to do. You should have seen him. He didn't get a chance to finish his sentence before Mike went all over the place. Randall's back. Sully wants to call someone? The CDA police? Anyone? Mike, wait. I have to alarm Celia and my mom. Oh my god, Sully. What are we gonna do about my mom? I have to protect her. Mike. Okay, here's the deal. You'll go get my mom and I'll alarm Celia and we'll meet each other at the corner of Winslow Street at 1 hour and then Mike! Sully had to raise his voice in order to make his friend listen. But once he had won his attention, it lowered again. I don't think Randall is after revenge. You don't? Then why is he here? To pick up the passport? Think about it, Mike. If he was after revenge, why hasn't he come back to get us? Nobody knows he's here. He could just camouflage and walk right into the factory and kill us, but he hasn't. What if he came back like an hour ago, just to decide to take a nap and then before come back for us? I don't know, Mike. It's just, after what Sophie told me, I've started thinking that he's actually a real sensitive guy, and I felt sorry for him all day, and sorry for what he did to him. I should have done something else. Anything else. Mike looked at his best friend for a long time before he said something by now. His tone was a lot calmer. Man, you are serious. You think there's a different side to Randall? Sully nodded. He was still having a hard time trying to figure out why he cared. Sophie had told him not to pin anything involving Randall on himself, but he couldn't help it, could it? He felt guilty for not doing anything to help. Mike's look was very serious and he continued. So what are you planning to do? If Randall's really back, troubled, and not coming after revenge? I thought about it on the way home, Mike, and I think I just want to try to talk to him. You can't try to talk to Randall? Have you ever even tried? Have you ever tried having a normal conversation with him? Mike had to admit it. He hadn't. Well, but I'm not exactly up for it either, so I don't see him as the easiest person to talk to. However, I'll be happy to give you a ride over to his place in my car tomorrow and let you take the risk of your life and try to talk to him. If that's what it is that it takes, then you shut up about this? Think you will? Thanks, Mike. You're very nice of you. Sully smiled for the first time that evening, and Mike gave him one back. I just want my thing in return. What is that? Finish your stupid slime burger. I spent 2 hours in the kitchen preparing them. Sully looked at his plate. Mike had done a good job with dinner, and the dessert wasn't that tempting. The whole seeing Randall shook and caused Sully to forget all about his groceries and so their dessert that night was going to be slightly expired yogurt from the fridge. He hadn't dared to tell Mike yet. Hardly a word was spoken by the two best friends in Mike's car. The next morning, Mike was nervous for Sully's attempt to talk to Randall, and Sully had to admit that he was too. He had no idea how his former colleague would react, but what bugged him the most was the fact that he couldn't come up with a good answer for himself. So what did he do exactly? He wanted to talk and to lead to. Did he wanted to get to know Randall as a better friend? Get rid of the whole guilt feeling? Both? Make sure Randall was okay? He didn't know, and the more he thought about it, the more he started to doubt about whether his visit was a good idea or not. "We are here," Mike slowed down and stopped the car outside of Randall's building. "Are you sure about this, Sul?" "Yeah, I just wanted to see if he's okay." "Do you want me to wait for you?" "No, you'll be late for work. Just go, I'll walk there." He stepped out of the car and closed the door. "See you later, Mike." "Hope so," Mike mumbled as he drove off towards the factory. Randall was hungry. He had been home for more than 24 hours now and he still hadn't eaten anything. He was on his third or fourth month a cup of tea, and he realized that he had to get a hold of some food soon. But how? It didn't feel like he was going to go to the store, and then no one would contact or ask him to bring him some. He had actually thought about calling Sophie, but he decided that she could not be trusted after what she told Sullivan yesterday. Just started thinking about the idea of sneaking into Miss Lorenzo's apartment to rob her fridge. He heard the sound of the front door being unlocked. Geez, was Sophie back already? Why, was she here to go through his personal belongings or something somehow? Just the idea of Randall made him jump out of front of her to scare her, but he decided that it would be safer just to hide again and see what he's up to. So he camouflaged again and turned off the TV and crawled back into the ceiling, looking at the door, expecting Sophie to come through at the moment. He could hear the sound of footsteps approaching. When Randall saw who the monster was walking through the door to his living room, he almost fell to the ground. Intentionally, it was a quick feint right then. It would have been preferred Sullivan was here again. Why? Sullivan looked around some more insecure about the area that he'd done the day before. He had a nervous look on his face and walked slowly and gazed up around the room with every step he took. His eyes fell on the covers of the sofa, and then on his teacups on the table. He touched one of them, and Randall cursed inside. That cup was still hot. Randall wasn't prepared for the question. Not at all. The first time he assumed Sullivan was only talking to himself, but as he spoke again, Randall suddenly noticed the same name being spelt out of his own, and a shiver went all the way up his spine. "Psst! Hey, Randall, are you in here?" Randall picked up. How could Sullivan possibly know he was here? What was there a reason he was back today? "Randall," Sully spoke up. "You in here? I need to talk to you. Come on out." Randall didn't know how to respond, and he was at all. The idea of letting Sullivan in made him feel really terrified. He didn't know the idea of what the blue monster was planning to do to him. He'd choose to remain silent. But Sully didn't give up that easily. "Come on, Randall. I know you're here. I saw you last night. I'm not going to hurt you or anything. I just need to talk to you. Come on." "No way. Randall." At this point, Sully had started searching for the entire apartment. He looked behind the couch, under the table, in the bedroom, in the bathroom, and starting to look through the cabinets in the kitchen. Randall couldn't hear and bear with anymore. "Oh, for Christ's sake. Sullivan, will you just stop?" Sully stood around and looked around, but he couldn't see Randall anywhere. He was still camouflaged and did hear him though. "Do you think I really fit in there? Are you that stupid? Look at the mess you're leaving behind. What the hell are you doing in my home, you big hairy surgeon?" "Okay, now you might be as a reappear, Randall." Sully looked in the direction where he located the voice. With a deep sigh, Randall slowly reappeared from the ceiling and had a big frown on his face as looked as if he wanted to lose his faith in monsterkind. He slowly got down to the floor and then glared at Sullivan. "You didn't answer my question. What are you doing here?" Sully looked at Randall. He thought he looked very worse than he had done the night before. He had bags underneath his eyes, pale, dry skin that appeared to have lost an unhealthy amount of weight. He looked straight out terrible. He had been into the human world. "I just wanted to check on you." Sully hadn't planned what to say. He regretted that now. "To see if you were okay." Randall just glared in his direction. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. Get out." "What? Get out!" Randall tossed one of his sofa cushions at Sully and yelled. It hadn't been that much effect. But Randall's intent wasn't to hurt the blue monster. He just wanted him to leave. "This is my apartment, and I don't want you here. Get out!" Clearly, Randall wasn't in the mood for company today. Sully just turned around to leave, but he looked at the other, who just stood perfectly still on the sofa and stared back at him, shaking with anger over his shoulder. As Randall picked up another sofa cushion, Sully knew his time was up. He went out of the living room and into the hall and took one last look at Randall before reopening the door. The lizard stood in the same place, still with the same expression, with the cushion lifted up above his head. His eyes were still locked with Sully's, and they expressed everything but hospitality. "I'll come back for you when you're feeling better." Sully didn't know why he said it. He hadn't planned to, but he didn't even know if it was true. Did he really want him to come back? He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway, and it had closed the door again. He heard the sound of something hitting, probably another cushion missile. The walk to work seemed longer than yesterday. Sully couldn't stop thinking about how the bad things turned out to be Randall's apartment, as he felt, if possible, even worse than last night. He didn't know what to do now. Perhaps he could just leave Randall alone? That was clearly the other part that he wanted, but he thought about the way Randall looked, and thought about Sophie's story. He decided that he couldn't just let him be. Randall needed help, and nobody else was going to offer him that. So if Sully didn't try it, he would probably end up feeling guilty about that too. He had to go back. He had to get him to talk. Randall sat on his couch with a new cup of tea. He was still shaking from his encounter with Sullivan, or maybe it was from hunger was the feeling. He wasn't exactly sure. No matter what he did, it made him feel very bad at the same time. "I just want to check on you. I just want to tell you that I'm sorry." Randall just frowned as he kept thought about Sullivan's words. Who would he showed up and suddenly care? It was probably the talk with Sophie that had softened him up. Geez, why couldn't she just keep her mouth shut? Randall just lay down and closed his eyes. He was very tired and didn't have anything better to do but he couldn't sleep. There was something on his mind. Something else that Sullivan said. "I'll come back when you're feeling better." Then you'll never have to come back, Randall thought to himself. Nothing could possibly make him feel better, ever. He pulled up the bed covers up to his head and tried to sleep again. The only thing that was on his mind, I hoped that Sullivan hadn't meant what he said about coming back.